Ledger HQ, file number 003. Have you ever looked at a map and thought, is there anything left? Any corner of the world that nobody owns? Any patch of land where you could just show up, plant a flag, write a constitution, and call it yours? It's the kind of thought that hits you once, usually around 2 a.m., and then you shake it off and go back to your life. But some people didn't shake it off. Some people actually tried it. And what happened to them is one of the strangest, most surprisingly real stories you have probably never heard. Because it turns out the answer to can you start your own country is not no. It's not yes either. It's something much more interesting than both of those. Before we get into what actually happened, you need to understand the rules. Because there are rules. International law has a document called the Montevideo Convention, signed in 1933, and it lays out exactly what makes something a country. 4 things: a permanent population, a defined territory, a functioning government, and the capacity to enter into relations with other states. The last one is the important one. We'll come back to it. On paper, these 4 requirements sound almost reasonable, almost achievable, and that is exactly the problem, because a small number of people read those 4 requirements and thought, yeah, I can do that. The first example is almost too easy. In 2014, an American man named Jeremiah Heaton wanted to make his 6-year-old daughter a princess. Not metaphorically, literally. She had asked him if she could be a real princess, and Jeremiah Heaton was apparently the kind of father who takes that question seriously. So he did some research, and he found something remarkable. Between Egypt and Sudan, there's a small, arid, completely useless patch of land called Bir Tawil. About 800 square miles of desert that neither Egypt nor Sudan claims. Not because they forgot about it, but because of a complicated border dispute where each country actually prefers a different boundary line that excludes Bir Tawil. So it sits there, technically belonging to no one. Heaton flew to Egypt, drove across the desert, hiked into Bir Tawil, and planted a flag he had made himself. He declared it the Kingdom of North Sudan. He named his daughter Princess Emily. The international community's response was a diplomatic equivalent of a shrug. No nation recognized the Kingdom of North Sudan. No one moved to stop him either. He had land, he had a flag. He had a daughter who was, by his own accounting, a princess. What he did not have was a country, because planting a flag in the dirt and calling yourself a king has roughly the same legal standing as drawing a border on your bedroom floor and telling your parents you've seceded. Territory, it turns out, is the easy part. But what if you didn't just plant a flag? What if you actually built something? In 1971, a Nevada real estate millionaire named Michael Oliver had a vision. He wanted to build a libertarian utopia, a country with no taxes, no welfare, no government interference, a place built entirely on free market principles. He called it the Republic of Minerva, and to his credit, he did not mess around. He hired dredging ships to pump sand into a submerged reef in South Pacific, near the island of Tonga. He literally manufactured land that did not previously exist. He issued currency. He drafted a constitution. He began accepting citizenship applications. For a brief moment in early 1972, the Republic of Minerva looked almost real. Then the King of Tonga sent a boat. Not a fleet, not a military operation. A boat, with a small party of Tongan officials aboard. They arrived at Minerva, removed the flag, planted their own, played the Tongan national anthem, and left. And that was that. The international community again said nothing. Nobody came to Minerva's defense. Michael Oliver had spent years planning and a significant amount of money building a country, and it was ended in an afternoon by a boat with a flag and a brass band. He tried again in the 1980s. Different location, same result. The lesson from Minerva is this: you can build the land, you can write the laws, you can do everything right. But if a larger nation decides your country is inconvenient and no one with power decides to care, your country is gone before the concrete dries. Which brings us to the main event. Because most attempts at starting a new country end like Bir Tawil, or Minerva, quietly, without ceremony, in the middle of nowhere. But one attempt went differently. One man found a loophole so specific, so perfectly timed, that it held. And it still holds today. His name was Paddy Roy Bates, and he was, before any of this, a pirate. Not the eye patch kind. In the 1960s, Britain had a thriving industry of pirate radio. Unlicensed stations broadcasting pop music from ships just outside British territorial waters, beyond the reach of the law. Bates ran one of these operations. He was loud, stubborn, and constitutionally incapable of being told what to do. In 1967, he was looking for a new location to broadcast from, and he found it. a rusting World War II anti-aircraft platform called HM Fort Ruffs, sitting in the North Sea about 7 miles off the coast of Suffolk. It had been abandoned by the British military in 1956. Crucially, it sat just outside Britain's territorial waters, outside anyone's territorial waters. Bates seized it, moved his family onto it, and on September 2nd, 1967, he declared it as an independent sovereign nation, the Principality of Sealand. He made himself prince, and his wife Joan became princess. Britain was not amused. When the Royal Navy approached the platform, Joan Bates fired warning shots at them, which is already a remarkable sentence. The British government took Bates to court, and here's where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming, least of all the British government. The court ruled that because the platform sat outside British territorial waters, it had no jurisdiction. The case was dismissed. In trying to shut Sealand down, the British legal system had accidentally handed Roy Bates the closest thing to legal validation a micronation had ever received. He didn't win recognition, but he got something almost as useful. Nobody could prove he was wrong. For the next decade, Sealand quietly existed. Roy Bates issued passports. He printed currency. He wrote a constitution. He built a small community on a rusted platform in the middle of the North Sea, and dared the world to do something about it. Then, in 1978, things got genuinely strange. A German businessman named Alexander Achenbach had been involved with Sealand for some time. He held a Sealand passport, one of the ones Roy had been issuing, and had given himself the title of Prime Minister of Sealand. While Roy and his wife were away on the mainland, Achenbach hired a group of Dutch and German mercenaries, arrived at the platform by helicopter, and staged a coup. They took the fort. They held Roy's son Michael hostage. For a brief period, Alexander Achenbach controlled the Principality of Sealand. Roy Bates responded in a way any reasonable head of state would. He hired his own helicopter, assembled a small team, flew out to the platform, and took it back by force. The mercenaries were captured. Achenbach was detained. Roy Bates then charged them all under Sealand law. He released the mercenaries fairly quickly, recognizing them as foreign nationals caught up in someone else's scheme. But Achenbach, who held a Sealand passport, was charged with treason against the Principality of Sealand. He was held on the platform as a prisoner of war. And then something happened that nobody expected. The Federal Republic of Germany, one of the most serious, stable, and respected governments on the planet, sent a diplomat to Sealand to negotiate Achenbach's release. Germany sent a diplomat to a rusted World War II fort in the middle of the North Sea to negotiate with a man who declared himself a prince. Roy Bates interpreted this as de facto recognition of Sealand's sovereignty. It was never officially confirmed. Germany would argue they were simply assisting a citizen in distress. But Roy had the story, and in the world of micronations, the story is everything. Achenbach was eventually released. He went back to Germany, declared himself the government in exile of Sealand, and spent the next several decades issuing his own Sealand passports, which led to an entirely separate scandal when fake Sealand passports started showing up in criminal cases across Europe. At this point, Sealand had outlasted a coup, a diplomatic incident, an international passport fraud ring, and the continued indifference of every government on Earth. It was not done. In 2000, at the height of the dot-com boom, a group of tech entrepreneurs approached Roy Bates with an idea. The internet was young, governments were only beginning to understand what it was, and the question of who had jurisdiction over data stored online was completely unsettled. The company was called Haven Co. The pitch was simple. Set up server infrastructure on Sealand, host data there, data that was legal under Sealand law, which Roy could define as he wished, but potentially illegal under the laws of any other country. A data haven beyond the reach of any government. In theory, it was brilliant. In practice, it ran into the reality that Sealand was a rusted platform with limited power, limited connectivity, and a sovereign who had his own opinions about what could and could not be hosted on his nation's infrastructure. Haven Co. collapsed by 2002. The servers went dark. The dream of a truly stateless internet jurisdiction died quietly, about a decade before anyone would have actually needed it. Roy Bates died in 2012. His son Michael runs Sealand today. The platform is still out there in the North Sea. It still flies its flag. It still issues passports and currency and nobility titles. In fact, you can go to the Sealand website right now and purchase a lordship for somewhere in the neighborhood of $40. For $40, you can be a lord of a nation that has survived a coup, a mercenary occupation, a helicopter counterattack, an international passport scandal, and over 50 years of polite international disregard. Honestly, at that price, it might be the best value in geopolitics. So back to the original question, can you actually start your own country? Here's the honest answer. The Montevideo Convention's 4 requirements were never really the point. Jeremiah Heaton met most of them. Michael Oliver met all of them. Roy Bates arguably met all of them and still does. The requirements are a framework, they are not a guarantee. The real requirement, the one that isn't written down anywhere, is that existing nations have to agree to let you exist. And existing nations have almost no reason to do that. The international system is a club, and the members of the club get to decide who gets in. They built it that way on purpose. The unclaimed land is essentially gone. The legal loopholes that let Sealand exist were products of a specific moment in maritime law that has since been closed. The deep ocean remains technically ungoverned, but it is covered by international frameworks that make any permanent structure there subject to the laws of whatever nation it's registered under. The window that Roy Bates climbed through in 1967 does not exist anymore. He found it at exactly the right moment, held it open with sheer stubbornness, and somehow kept it from closing for the rest of his life. What's left is Sealand, a rusted platform, a flag, a family that refuses to quit, and for $40, a lordship that is technically, legally, and completely meaninglessly yours. This is file number 003. This is Ledger.